afternoon. It's a cold, getting colder. It's a colder Sunday. I know when it gets colder, we get more hungrier, and they say during the wintertime, people gain about 2 to 3 kilograms. My winter started in the summer. I'm already at 3 kilograms, right? Today's a very interesting sermon because it came from a question that someone gave me during the week. And there's this person that went to this retreat, and there's a person that we're teaching Bible study to, and she said to me, you know what? I just went to a retreat last week, and I totally encountered God. Like, I felt God's presence. He was there. It was like, wow, it was such an amazing retreat I had over the weekend. And then she said to me right after but man, like the next day on Monday, I come back to school and I'm lonely again, and I feel like this again, and I feel like that, and then you completely fail the next day, and it's like you were just with God on Sunday and sat like just an entire weekend, and then the next day, what happens is you completely fail. And then you're on this super high, then all of a sudden it reaches this super low because it's like, well, I was so close to God on the weekend, and then I come back to school, and it's like you have this huge drop, and you do the things that you didn't want to do. You feel guilty and you feel ashamed. And, for myself too, I remember this too because everyone remembers the time, like, when we used to a lot of us used to go to church, right? Oh, no, we'll still go to church right now, right? But you used to go to church, right? And that's why we're at church, right? So when I was young, the craziest part is like the first time I really accepted Christ into my life was at like 10 years old. 10 years old, I got on my knees, I just started crying, and I don't know if maybe I accepted Christ the next year too. So I don't know if it's because I was crying, I couldn't say the full I couldn't say the whole prayer, and that's why I need to say it again the next year. And then I think I accepted Christ 4 times, and I got baptized 5 times, okay? So I got baptized 5 times, so I'm saved 5 times over, okay? So how many people have been baptized more than once? No? Physically. 0? Really? No one's been baptized more than... Okay, as a baby I was once, and 4 times you're twice, right? Twice? Okay, I'm 5 times, okay? Huh? Well, that was the difference. One time the guy just put water in his hand and slapped it on my head, and then it just kind of just dribbled down my face. I'm just like, is this baptism? Because he puts his hand in the water and he puts it on my head, and it just kind of dribbles down my face. I'm like, oh, this is really awkward. The next time there's someone else who did it, and he took it and he splashed my face. It's really weird. Ooh, baptism, right? I'm like, okay, it's like you're spitting in my face. And then one time it was the big one, right? When you're in the pool and you're like, he's like, put your hands like this. I'm like, why? He's like, I'm gonna dunk you backwards, right? And the one thing I hate about going, I had a swimming pool when I was younger. The worst part about going into the water is going in backwards. Why? It goes up your nose and everything else. And I was like, can I go forward? Why do I have to go backwards, right? And he's like, fall into God. I'm like, okay. I dropped, and it's up my nose and stuff. I did so many times, right? And I thought to myself, why the heck did I do it so many times, right? Why the heck did I get baptized so many times? And why the heck did I accept Christ over and 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 over again, right? And I even contemplated to doing again when I was 15. I was like, I should do this again, kind of thing, right? And I realized what happened was, our summer camps were always in August, right? And they're always in August right before the school semester starts. So the purpose of it was supposed to be you get super spiritually high to carry over for the rest of the school year, right? But instead it's you're super high, and the next day it's hey guys, how's it going? All right, man. And then you go back into your own ways, and you feel super guilty, and you feel like, what did I just do? I was so spiritual. And you go back to school, and you go to church for the first time after you go to school, and it's you can't even reckon, you kind of feel embarrassed. You feel embarrassed because you cried, you said you'd give your life to Christ, you said you'd do everything for Him, but the week after you come back from the first week of school, it's the same thing, nothing's changed. And then when the year goes by, you realize all the junk that you've done in your life, and you realize you really need this church camp kind of thing, right? To get yourself spiritual again, which kind of leaves this cycle that goes over and over. And that's why people get baptized 5 times or like accept Christ 4 times or whatever it is, right? So my question to you is, why is there failure after victory? Like, why is it we always fail really hard after like this great encounter with God? Or when we like get close to God and we feel like, oh, I realized who the Christ is. Oh my goodness, this is the greatest day of my life. And then life goes back to where it was before. Now I'm going to show you an interesting story today, right? Today's story, I'm going to tell you about a guy named Elijah. I'm going to tell you why, through the scriptures, why these types of things always happen and why it's going to happen continuously in your life if you don't change this one thing, okay? So Elijah, right, he was actually considered the second greatest prophet in all of Israel in the Old Testament time. There's no one greater than him except Moses, okay? And the thing that made him so amazing was he did one of the most greatest things ever for all of Israel, okay? Now the time of Elijah was very interesting because the time of Elijah, there was tons of idol worship, okay? And there was this king, his name was King Ahab. Right? Ahab, like from Moby Dick, right? King Ahab was there. And the thing that made him so wicked and the thing that made him such a wicked king was he forced everyone to believe in idols. And who was it because of? His wife, right? It's always, no, I'm just kidding, right? So he's like, his wife, Jezebel, right? I was going to think about Adam and Eve too. It's her fault, right? So Jezebel was the one. Jezebel was from another country. She brought in her idols. And the crazy part was Jezebel was so crazy strong in her mind about worshiping these idols that she would round up the prophets of Israel and kill them one by one. And as he's killing all the prophets of Israel, Elijah was the only prophet left at that time, okay? So he's the only one left. And what happens is Elijah one day comes up and he goes up to the king and he says, hey, guess what? You know, there's going to be punishment because of what you're doing. So what Elijah did was he prayed and then it stopped raining, okay? He stopped raining for 3.5 years, okay? So it stops raining, people are suffering, and King Ahab was like, you know, the more and more he thought about Elijah, the more and more he got angry. Like, who does this guy think he is? But you know, if 6 months passes by without rain, you can still be angry. But when it gets to a year, like 13, 14 months, you're not angry anymore. You're kind of like you kind of start to believe in this guy, right? And you're like, oh, you're the pain. You're the reason why we're going through this. But eventually you realize that he's the only way you're going to get out of it. So one day, at the 3.5 year mark, right? 3.5 years of no rain. Elijah one day comes to King Ahab and he says, King Ahab, I got a challenge for you. Okay, and he says, what is it? You know, let's look at 1 Kings chapter 18. We'll look at verse 21. And this is the first challenge. He says, Elijah went before the people and said, okay, look. He gathers all the prophets, which were 850, and he was the last one at his time. And he comes in front of the people and says, here, let me tell you guys, right? He says, Israel, how long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But yet the people said nothing, right? So here he is, the last prophet of Israel, and he has this like audacity to come before all these people who don't worship God anymore. They don't even want God anymore. And he says, okay, let me give you the challenge, right? Come on, people. How long going to be like this? How long going to be like this? Can you imagine that if you were the one doing that even right now in New York, just in Manhattan, you gather 2 million people and said, how long will you waver against God of Israel, right? And you know, 95% of the people here are Jewish too, right? So you're like, yeah, Jesus, right? And you'd be sitting there, and do you think they'd say anything? They'd look at you like, are you kidding me? Like, seriously, are you kidding me? Like, it's like you standing up in front of a restaurant. So here's this bold guy says, no, how dare you be like this? And then what happens is he says, okay, let's make a challenge. And this is the craziest challenge I've ever heard. This is the craziest challenge. I've only heard one person do this before. There's only one person in my life who has ever done this challenge, and I don't know if you'd ever want to make this challenge, but this is how bold. Like, there's my senior pastor, one time he told me that there was someone who was coming against God, and he basically challenged the guy and says, okay, he grabs the guy's hand and he says, all right, if I'm right and God is real, you die. And if you're right, I'll die. And then he prays the prayer holding this person's hand. And can you imagine that? Like to have how bold you'd have to be? Oh, you think you're right? All right, let's bet our lives on it, okay? If you don't do this, if you're right, I die. And if I'm right, you're die. Let's pray to God right now. Like, do you want to pray that prayer? It's not something you take lightly. Like, I've never heard anyone say this but one person in my life, right? And if you hear the story later, the other person died. It's as crazy as it is, right? So that kind of goes into this message, right? So what happens here is he goes to all the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and he says, 850 prophets, let's do a challenge, okay? We're going to set up altars, and whoever's God takes this sacrifice by fire will be the living God, and the other ones die. And the prophets of Baal and Asherah, they look at themselves and like, look, there's 850 of us, plus all of Israel believes in us. Sure, let's do it. And Elijah is by himself, and no one believes in him. They actually think he's a pest. And he says, okay, guys, well, you got 850, so I'm sure your God will listen to you because you're much louder than me, so you guys can go ahead first. So they build this altar, they put this sacrifice, and they start like screaming and chanting and praying, right? And what happened, it starts in the morning, and now it's already midday, which means that they've been doing it for like 4 hours already, like chanting and praying. Like, I don't know how long you have to do this, but in verse 27, what happens is, what Elijah starts to do, he starts doing something like a little bit more fun. In verse 27, what does it say? In verse 27, it says, at noon, Elijah began to taunt them. He says, shout louder. Come on. Maybe, he's God, so maybe he's deep in thought. Maybe he's busy, or maybe he's traveling somewhere. Maybe he's sleeping, and you got to wake him up, right? So, here this one dude by himself is taunting like thousands of people. And what happens is they start shouting louder, grabbing whips, and start whipping themselves on the back, right? So these people are whipped, they're bloodied, they're being whipped, and they go straight till evening. I don't know how long you can whip yourself for, right? But they're, can you do this for how long? Until evening, right? So we're talking until 6 p.m. So noon to 6 p.m., you go 6 hours more. And then finally, he's like, all right, you guys done? You guys done? Okay, let me show you what it is. And then what he does is he goes even crazier, okay? So look at verse 33. In verse 33, what he does is he arranges the wood, cuts the bone to pieces, and lays it on the wood. And then he says, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood. Right? So this is not like, he's not just doing like, okay, let me show you. He's like going, I'm going to taunt you so bad right now. 4 jars of water, and they said that's about 75 liters. And then you know what he does? He says, fill him up again, and he does it 3 times. He's just pouring water all over it. And he said he even dug a moat around it just so the water fills up, right? So can you imagine everyone's watching this like, what the heck? He's like, no, put some more water on it. It's only 75 liters. Let's go 150. Let's go 225 liters, right? And he keeps filling it up and up again, right? So the crowd and everyone's like, they've been there all day. They're wondering, what the heck is going on? And then in verse 37, 38, he makes this bold prayer, right? And 1 Kings chapter 18, 37, 38, he says, answer me, Lord. Answer me so these people will know that you, Lord, are God and that you are turning their hearts back again. And when he prays this prayer, what does it say? Verse 38, fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up all the water in the trench. Right? So imagine seeing this, people praying for like 12 hours, right? And then all of a sudden, one guy comes in and says, all right, and he builds a moat, pours water on it, he prays once, and then, and everything's gone. Then what do you think the people started doing? The people said, the Lord of Israel is God. He is truly the God, the King of Kings. And they went against Baal and Asherah, and what Elijah said after? Everyone, pick up your swords. And the Israelites picked up their sword, and he says, kill the prophets. And they're like, ah! And they started killing 850 prophets of Baal. Okay? So imagine this. This is why he's the second greatest prophet in all the Old Testament time. So when you think about this, imagine you or seeing something like this, what would you think of Elijah? Like, this guy is not nuts, but this guy is crazy, amazing, awesome man of God. God listens to him. He prays, and what happens? The rain stops. He prays, and then the rain comes back after 3 years. This guy is basically like God. He's like God. You got to think about this. Everyone's screaming and hurting themselves. He's like, God, answer them now, okay? All right, so what do you guys think? And they're like, okay. Ah! They start killing people, right? And that's what actually happened, right? So you look at this, you're like, God, man, how would you feel after that victory, honestly? And you bring the entire country back to God. You've saved tens and hundreds of thousands of people in one day. And God looks at you like, man, that's the man, right? That's the man, right? And he's like going, I'm the man. You're the man, right? It's like, and they're like high-fiving with God, right? It's like high-fiving, they're doing everything with God, right? It's the greatest thing ever, right? And it's such an amazing thing. And you can imagine the rush you have, right? The rush. It's almost like, imagine you won the Powerball $1.6 billion. So you guys understand that, but you don't understand this, right? Like 1.6 billion. Oh my gosh. So you understand Elijah? Not really, but yeah, I guess so, right? So we sit there like, oh, it's such a rush. It's so amazing. The confidence is just oozing out of you, okay? So, all the idol worshipers are now dead, okay? All the people of Israel have turned back to God, and now it becomes the next day, okay? Now, the next day happens, and what happens is Jezebel. We all know Jezebel, right? And Jezebel hears the news. She's like going, time to worship Baal. And she goes to la la la. And she's like, where are my prophets? And they're like, Ahab's like, you didn't hear? She's like, what do you mean? They're dead. Yeah, they're dead. I'm sorry. I don't know. She's like, what do you mean they're dead? If they're dead, you are dead. And he was like, oh, okay, no, this is what happened yesterday. It was Elijah, and she becomes furious, okay? She is so furious. Let's take a look at 1 Kings chapter 19. We'll look at verse 2. And look what she says the next day. Jezebel sends a messenger to Elijah and says, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Right? Now, you think to yourself, it's like, girl, I just killed 850 prophets, and they listened to me right away, and, I'm God's man. Everything you say doesn't mean anything to me, right? I just did the greatest thing in all of the Bible besides Moses, and you're threatening me by your gods? Got to think about that, right? This is the next day. And then Elijah's reaction in verse 3 is, verse 3, and it says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Huh? Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. You got to think about this very carefully, right? Why is it that after something so great we go through, why is it after that encounter with God, feeling the Holy Spirit, going through something so amazing with God, that the next day you can turn around and just like, oh, God, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this. You got to think about that. This person prays and commands the weather, which not a single person in the world can do. This person's the one that can ask God to take a sacrifice just drenched in water the day before, and yet he gets scared and afraid and says, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do it. And it doesn't just say he gives up. He just says, I'm afraid. How can you be afraid after you just did that? When God is on your side, when God shows you a sign, God shows you a miracle. And the crazy part is it happens in your life all the time. Whenever you meet God, that one day is great, but the next day sucks. I don't know what it is, right? We go through some just junk, and you even forget about what happened the day before and what God did for you. Verse 4. It got so severe. In verse 4, Elijah went into the desert, went a day's journey into the wilderness. Then he came to a broom bush. He sat down under it, and he prayed. What did he pray for? He's like, just kill me. Can you understand that? After all this here, at the next stage, it's like, no, God, just kill me. I've had enough. Can you believe this? The next day he says, no, I have enough. Take my life. I'm no better than anyone else. He's like, what do you mean you're not better than you just brought an entire nation back to God? And now the next day, you're telling God, I've had enough? Right? I've had enough. You got to think about this to yourself. Why is there always this big failure after victory? Right? Why do we always have this failure that comes right after? And this is going to be today's key Bible verse, and it's going to give us two answers today, right? Two answers about why is it always like this all the time when it comes to us and God, where it's so great one day and it just sucks the next day, you don't want to do anything anymore. So, haven't you seen people who are so moved by the words of God and the next week they don't come to church? Isn't it crazy? Why is it like that? Let's take a look at today's key verse, which is 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. It says, but be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Right? We're going to get two answers from this. The first thing is this. Having a victory, right? Having a big victory doesn't mean it's finished. That's the first problem we have in our minds is Elijah defeated Satan, right? He defeated Satan, destroyed the idols, he brought the entire nation back, and then he thinks, it's done, Satan's dead. But if you think about it yourself, does Satan ever die? How many times have you defeated Satan, then he tempts you the next day? How many times did you overcome something so great, and then he tempts you with something small the next day, and then you completely crumble? Why? It's because you think that it ends at just that. Oh, I defeated Satan. Wow, it's done. You know what? How many times you said that? That you defeated Satan and it's done? It's not done. Satan will be next to you. He'll be looking for you until you die. Until you die. There's no ending. Right? This is the first problem we have with ourselves is you actually think there's an ending to when you've defeated Satan, it's done now, Satan's scared of you. You know what? Satan's scared of you for that moment. And you know what he does next? What does it say in that verse? He says, he prowls like what? The devil prowls like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Satan is so smart and he's so wise. You know how wise Satan is? Well, how old is Satan if I asked you? How old is he? He's older than old, right? He's older than dirt, right? Because he's older than the earth, right? He's older than the universe, okay? Now let me ask you another question. When you talk to someone who's 80 years old, who has tons of experience in life, and when you talk to them, are they wiser or less? They're super wise, right? And that's only 80 years. Extend that to say 10 billion years. How wise would you be? Right? With more experience, you get more wiser. Now, imagine Satan, who's been here forever, even before dirt was even existed, and he's living for billions of years, and then, what do you think, he's dumb? Satan is so smart, he doesn't care about these little victories. Oh, you won that one? All right, don't worry. Just gonna wait for the next opportunity. He's waiting for the next opportunity. That's what he's doing. Why does Satan like it when you have great victories? Why? Because when you have a great victory, a small thing will take you down so far. He's waiting for those big moments in your life where you think everything is just awesome. You just passed, passed the SAT in flying colors. You got into the university you wanted. You got the job you want. We have all these victories that we have that you saved a life and brought them to Christ. And you look at that and you're like, wow, that's so great. But guess what? He comes the next day. He comes the next hour. He comes the next moment. First thing is, Satan is waiting. And that's the one thing we don't do very well. And we're like, yeah, it's done. We beat Satan. And then the next point, he comes again with this really small thing. And you're like, God, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. I just don't want to do this anymore. So, I quit. Yeah, so just take my life. I want to die. Can you imagine what that looks like to God? Like how crazy we look? That you can do something so massively huge and have a victory over Satan, and yet the next day over something so small, you turn your mind around and you say, nah, I don't do this anymore. That's when God looks at us, that's what he sees. He sees crazy people, people that belong in a hospital. You gotta think about that. We belong in a hospital. We're crazy. The next day, our minds are different, right? Number one is victories are never forever. They're not eternal. The victories you have are one at a time, which means every victory you have, you gear up for the next one, right? There's one scene, everyone's seen the movie 300. I don't know if that's my generation. You guys have also seen 300, right? Most of you, maybe not. But it's about, I believe it's about Greece, right? And the Spartans. And the Spartans are very interesting because they got like 2 million people coming, and then they bring them into this like tiny path, and then they win the first battle. And then in the scene, what do you see? That first battle's finished, they win. 300 soldiers just like kill thousands, right? And then at night, when everyone's regrouping, these 300 people are like, yeah! They're screaming, and of course they're super buff, and the rain is like pelting off their bodies and stuff like, yeah! But in the front, there's a Leonidas, which is the king at that time, right? The king, everyone else is celebrating, and the king is not celebrating, but he's just staring into what's going to happen next. Why? Because the battle continues tomorrow too. He doesn't celebrate, right? He doesn't get overeager. He doesn't get arrogant. He doesn't feel like, yes, we won everything. It's the first battle out of, even if you took 100,000 out of 2 million, how many more battles do you have? You got 19 more battles left. Could you really say you're victorious? Except for the one who did the math really quickly, right? Think about that, 19 more battles, and everyone's like, yeah! But in the end, what happens to the 300? They all die. They don't even win the big battle, right? The crazy part is, there's a battle coming up next. Leonidas, who was the leader, the smart one, he looked and everyone else was celebrating. He thought to himself, what do we do next? Battle's tomorrow. We got another battle tomorrow, right? This verse, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, not only has the answer of why Satan always gets us the day after, but he also gives us the answer of what is the thing that you're not doing. Let's turn back to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. It says the first 6 words. What does the first 6 words say? Be alert and of sober mind, right? Or in other words, be alert and self-controlled, right? Be alert and self-controlled. One of the things that happens to us as human beings is we're very emotional. So when you get emotional, what happens is when you get too high or too low, you let your guard down. You're not alert anymore. You're not self-controlled if you're too high or too low. Think about it. When someone wins constantly, what eventually happens to their mind if they don't control it? They get arrogant, right? It's like, if we were, sometimes, the guys would play card games or whatever, and I keep winning. Yeah, eventually you get arrogant because I keep winning. Right, guys? Well, so it happens. If you keep winning, eventually you lose your guard. You drop your guard. You're no longer self-controlled, and you don't play like you normally play. Why? Because you think you're going to win anyways, right? You make small mistakes. You do stupid things, right? As we saw in the video before, Danny is a Division I athlete. Athletes go through this on a daily basis. It's a daily thing. We go through all the time. Why? Because you're constantly in that, and then you're in competition and practice, and we always go through that. Oh, I've won the last 3, so I'm probably going to win the 4th one too. That's the moment you lose. What happens if you get too low? Gosh, if you get too low, you get depressed. You don't want to do it anymore. What's the point? What's the point of living? I just lost a game of cards. Might as well kill myself. Gosh, can't prove myself as number 1 anymore, so might as well cut my head off. Yeah, maybe I'll do it to no, forget it. Maybe I'll kill no, I'm just kidding, right? Yeah, but that's the thing. People actually get to that state. That's the crazy part. If you watch the news, are people only killing themselves? Think about it carefully. Are people only killing themselves? They're killing other people all the time more than they kill themselves, right? People killing their own children, right? I saw some stuff in the news last week that people, just the most disturbing things where they find their 3-year-old daughter in the oven. You hear about these and you're like, what are these people thinking, right? But what's happening is because they've lost their self-control. They're no longer alert in their minds. They've gone too far down or too far up. The thing we have to understand, right? The thing we have to understand about ourselves is this. How do I keep myself to get into that alert mind or to become more self-controlled? And that's the thing we have to think about right now is, well, how do I get to that point? Because it's so hard, right? It's so hard. The one thing that people do not take advantage of when they should, right? The one thing that is so powerful, the one thing that every person has permission and the power to do, the one thing that every person can overcome every victory, overcome every difficulty, overcome every tribulation, overcome every dark spot they live in their life, is the one thing people never take advantage of. This last verse I give to you is in James chapter 5, verse 16 and 17. And it tells you about this one thing. It's about Elijah here too, right? It's the one thing he forgot to do. It's the one thing that he had, and he used it so many times except for that last moment. In James chapter 5, verse 16 and 17, what does it say? Well, it says, the prayer of the righteous person is powerful. That even when Elijah prayed, the sky shut up and there was no rain for 3.5 years. And then he prayed again, and then the skies opened up and rain came pouring down. Prayer. It's the most valuable thing we have that takes no effort. You don't need money. You don't need to wear nice clothes. You don't need to do it at a specific, a specific moment, like you have to chant something or say magic words. Prayer is so valuable, and people don't realize this, that the power that comes from prayers will even change the weather. And you think, really? Elijah's an Old Testament servant, and you're a child of God. And even children of God are not even compared to brides of God. Every problem, he could have solved that last one with prayer. He could have done it. He knew it. He was doing it every single time. God, please save us right now. Show them that you are God. Turn their hearts back to you. And God's fire came down and took up the sacrifice. And he says, God, their hearts have turned back. Bring back the rain. And he prayed to God, and the rain came back. If you think about your prayers, none of our prayers are really that big. Like that big. Like we're not asking for an earthquake. We're not asking for God to stop a tsunami. You have to realize the power of prayer. It's not just these things on the outside, but it will settle your heart. It'll sober your mind. It'll give you self-control again. So you stop thinking those thoughts that are useless, that turn to you looking at God and saying, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. I quit. I just can't do this, God. Prayer. It's the realization and the actualization of true, deep prayer is missing in so many people's lives. Anyone can do it at any time, but you choose not to. And this is why the devil prowls around like this roaring lion, taking believer after believer, after child, after bride. You have to turn your hearts back. Have you lost that taste for prayer? Haven't you ever had that prayer when you felt God so deeply, your tears, even though you never even said a word, but you just feel it? You have to turn it back. Turn it back to prayer. The issues and the problems you deal with, they are not that big for God. They're big for you, but they are nothing for God. Turn your hearts back. Let's just close our eyes for a moment. And I just want everyone to think about, just remember that time you had the most amazing prayer, that you were so moved in your heart that you couldn't help but cry and tears came out of your eyes. That's where you have to get back to. You have to realize prayer again. The value of prayer is so deep. And just like Elijah, he did it all the time in his life except for that last moment, and that last moment took him out. Let me pray. Almighty God, We're so grateful and thankful that you blessed us at this time. And we see that you give us these amazing victories in our life, these amazing victories that are impossible without you. And we see the power that you use through our bodies when we save people, when we preach the gospel, when we evangelize, when we pray, when we meet people, when we show love, your love to people. You show us these amazing miracles. But oftentimes than not, we lose the next day or the next moment or the next minute. And we forgot how much you were working through our lives and how much you loved us so deeply. I pray, Lord God, help us to realize that prayer, to sober our minds, to control ourselves once again. This is a time for all of us to realize prayer again. It's a time for all of us, Lord God, when we have the opportunity, which is at every moment, we got to pray the prayers that will move your heart. We thank you so much for all that you've done for us each and every day. Bless us in all that we do. But I pray, Lord God, that the people in this room, at least from this room, will become people of prayer. We thank you so much for all that you've done. We pray all these things in the name of our beloved living Lord Christ. Amen.
He can take you where you wanna go. He can take you where you wanna go. He can take you where you wanna go. He can show you what you wanna know.